It was a cold December morning when Eleanor Hastings first noticed the young man sleeping on the park bench across from her bakery. The fog hung low, softening the edges of the world, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted through the air. Eleanor had owned Hastings Bakes for almost 30 years. It was her pride and joy, a small bakery tucked into a quiet corner of Maple Street, where she had spent more mornings than she could count kneading dough and listening to the world wake up outside. The young man was there again the next morning, huddled under a worn gray blanket, his backpack serving as a pillow. Eleanor had seen her share of wanderers over the years, but something about him made her pause. Maybe it was the way he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, or the way he seemed so quiet, so careful not to be noticed. He wasn't begging or asking for anything, he just existed, as if hoping the world would pass him by without judgment. By the third morning, Eleanor couldn't ignore him anymore. The December chill was biting, and she worried he might not last long sleeping outdoors. As she unlocked her shop and began preparing the morning pastries, she decided to do something simple, something kind. She packed a warm croissant, a cup of coffee, and one of her famous cinnamon rolls into a paper bag, then walked across the street. "Morning," she said softly, setting the bag down beside him. The young man stirred, blinking in surprise. His hair was messy but clean, his face pale and thin. "Ma'am, No need for that," Eleanor said, cutting him off gently. "Just breakfast. It's cold out, and no one should start their day hungry." He hesitated, eyes darting between her face and the bag, then nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and raspy. Eleanor smiled and returned to her shop, not expecting anything more. It was just breakfast, nothing more, nothing less. But the next morning, the young man came to her door. "Ma'am," he asked quietly when she looked up from wiping the counter. "I wanted to pay you back for yesterday, but I don't have money. Maybe I can sweep or clean up. Anything, really." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone who was trying, someone who had pride left despite life's blows. She hesitated. Her bakery wasn't hiring, and she usually worked alone, but something about the earnestness in his eyes tugged at her heart. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Cole." "Well, Ethan Cole," she said with a faint smile, "how about you sweep the floors and stack the bread trays? That should cover breakfast." Ethan nodded quickly, relief flashing across his face. From that morning on, it became a quiet arrangement, unspoken but steady. Every day, Ethan would sweep the floors, wipe down the tables, or carry boxes from the back. In return, Eleanor made sure he had something warm to eat and a place to sit where the cold couldn't reach him. Days turned into weeks, and soon, Ethan was part of the rhythm of Hastings Bakes. The customers got used to seeing him there, moving quietly through the shop. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried thoughtfulness. He had a soft smile that appeared rarely but lit up his whole face when it did. One snowy afternoon, Eleanor found him sitting by the window after the lunch rush, staring out at the falling snow. His fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup absently. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. He glanced up, startled, then gave a small smile. "Just remembering things. I used to bake with my mom when I was younger. Cinnamon rolls were her favorite too." Eleanor leaned on the counter, curious. "You bake?" He nodded. "Used to. I was studying culinary arts before." His voice trailed off, and he stared at his coffee. "Before everything fell apart." Eleanor didn't press. Some stories, she knew, only came out when they were ready. Instead, she said, "Well, if you still remember how, you can help me tomorrow morning. The early shift. We'll see if your cinnamon rolls can match mine." Ethan's eyes widened slightly, then a small, genuine grin tugged at his lips. "You're on." The next morning, the bakery smelled even sweeter than usual. Ethan arrived before sunrise, rolling up his sleeves with a spark of energy Eleanor hadn't seen before. They worked side by side, kneading, mixing, and laughing softly at the mess they made. His technique was careful but skilled, his touch gentle. The rolls he made weren't perfect, but they had something, heart. When they pulled the trays from the oven, Eleanor took one bite and smiled. "Well, Ethan Cole, you might just be a natural after all." He laughed quietly, the sound light and warm. "Guess I had a good teacher once." That day marked the beginning of something new. Eleanor started teaching him more, how to balance flavors, how to pipe icing, how to price pastries. He soaked up every lesson eagerly, showing a quiet determination that reminded her of her younger self. He never asked for more than what she offered, never complained, and always thanked her before leaving. Winter slowly melted into spring, and with it came change. Ethan started to regain color in his face and hope in his eyes. One evening, as Eleanor was closing the shop, he lingered near the door. "I wanted to tell you," he began, his voice uncertain, "I found a place to stay. Just a small room, but it's something. And I've been saving up. I'll keep working here, if you'll have me." Eleanor smiled, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "Of course, Ethan. You're part of this place now." Months passed, and Hastings Bakes became livelier than it had been in years. Customers began asking for Ethan's pastries by name. He introduced new ideas, small innovations that made the shop even better. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt something she hadn't realized she'd lost, purpose beyond the routine. Then came the summer storm. It hit without warning, lightning flashing and thunder cracking through the quiet night. The next morning, Eleanor arrived to find the bakery's roof had leaked, soaking the front counter and ruining dozens of supplies. Insurance would cover part of it, but repairs would take weeks. She sat on a stool, holding her head in her hands, wondering if this was the end. Ethan found her there, eyes tired and face pale. "We'll fix it," he said firmly. "We can't let this place close." "Ethan, the repairs will cost more than I have right now," she admitted softly. "And even if I could afford it, I don't have the energy to start over." But Ethan wasn't listening to defeat. He spent the day cleaning, drying, and salvaging whatever he could. Then, without telling her, he started a small fundraiser online. He called it Save Hastings Bakes, a Home for Kindness. He shared their story, how a simple breakfast on a cold morning had changed his life, how Eleanor had given him not just food but dignity, purpose, and hope. The story spread faster than either of them expected. Within days, messages poured in, customers, neighbors, even strangers from other towns donating, sharing, and writing words of encouragement. One message read, "I used to stop by Hastings Bakes with my grandmother every Sunday. It's more than a bakery, it's a memory." Another said, "Kindness like this deserves to stay alive." Within 2 weeks, they had enough to repair the roof and restock the shelves. When Eleanor saw the total, she could barely speak. Tears filled her eyes as she turned to Ethan. "You did this," she whispered. He shrugged, embarrassed. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. I just wanted to return the favor." Eleanor reached out and pulled him into a hug. "You didn't return a favor, Ethan. You reminded me why I started this bakery in the first place." By autumn, Hastings Bakes was more successful than ever. The little shop that had once been quiet now buzzed with laughter, warmth, and life. People came not just for the pastries but for the feeling of belonging that filled the air. One afternoon, a woman in her late 50s walked in, carrying a camera and a notebook. She introduced herself as a local journalist. "I heard about your story," she said. "The kindness, the fundraiser, it's beautiful. We'd love to feature you both in the paper." Eleanor looked at Ethan, who turned red instantly. "Oh, I don't think." But the journalist smiled. Sometimes, quiet acts make the loudest impact. The article was published under the headline, "The Quiet Gift That Changed Everything." It told of a baker who gave a meal to a stranger, and how that small act rippled into something extraordinary. Readers were moved. People began sharing their own stories of kindness, small, humble moments that had changed their lives. Years passed, and the world moved on, but Hastings Bakes remained a symbol of hope. Ethan eventually became Eleanor's full partner in the business. She insisted he take ownership when she retired, saying it was his time to carry the torch. On her last day, as the evening sun filtered through the bakery windows, Eleanor stood by the counter, watching Ethan help a young girl decorate cupcakes. She smiled softly, her heart full. Before leaving, she handed him a small, worn box tied with ribbon. "A gift," she said simply. When Ethan opened it later that night, he found her old handwritten recipe book inside. On the first page, she had written, "For Ethan, who reminded me that kindness is the secret ingredient to every good thing. Keep giving quietly, the world needs it." Years later, people still spoke of Hastings Bakes as a place where kindness lived in every loaf, every pastry, every smile. And though Eleanor's chair by the window now sat empty, her spirit lingered in the warmth of the ovens and in the heart of the young men who once slept on a park bench. Because sometimes, the smallest gift, offered quietly, without expectation, can change everything.